sound test, blah, blah, blah. Hello, and once again, welcome back to the shop. It's Mike, and today I am joined by two robots made out of junk. These are, of course, Tom Servo and Crow T Robot from Mystery Science Theater 3000. Now, those of you who are unfamiliar with Mystery Science Theater 3000, henceforth known as MST3K, it started out as a cable access show in Minneapolis in 1988 on KTMA TV and was created by a fellow named Joel Hodgson. Shortly thereafter, it was picked up by Comedy Central and aired on Comedy Central until 1996, and then disappeared for a while until recently when Joel Hodgson crowdfunded it coming back on Netflix. And it came back to Netflix in 2017, and I believe is still running. I'm not sure, I haven't looked into that. I believe it has at least run up to 2019. I don't know if it's still on. But from 1988 to today, there's been a total of 217 episodes and one feature film. There's been a slew of different hosts. There's Joel Hodgson, who was the creator of it, started out as the first host of the show, and then he was replaced by Mike Nelson, and then Jonah Ray. Now, of all the things that have changed with the show, two things have remained pretty much exactly the same, and it's these two guys. As I said earlier, Tom Servo and Crow. Now, these guys are built from a mix of real parts, the actual original parts from the period that were used to make them, and some cast parts and vacuum form parts that I got from Bob Bukowski. Now, Bob Bukowski is the guy that rebuilt all of the robots for the Netflix reboot, so there is quite a bit of lineage to all this as it stands, but some of it is original parts, and you can see actually some of the parts here that I still have left over that I didn't use, and I'll get into those in a bit. So let's have a look at how Tom is built. As most people have figured out, Tom's head is actually a gumball machine, more specifically a carousel snack gumball machine. And his mouth is actually manipulated by just a piece of string that's tied to the manipulator gear in there. The body is what's called a money lover barrel. Now, this thing's a sort of piggy bank that was made in New York back in the 80s. And this is a resin casting of one. And it is quite handy because on the top of this, to make his head spin, there's this ball bearing plate. And if you buy this kit from Bob, you have these marking points here where to drill it in. And the plate is actually just attached with some screws and stays in place quite well. And then you take the gumball machine or head of Tom and you screw it onto the top, and then it will rotate quite freely. And then you can get that movement. It's all connected with some PVC pipe. Now, the bowl on the bottom is actually just a Halloween candy bowl from the 80s. And there's copies of them available around still. The little objects that go around the outside of it are actually the locomotive from the Super Turbo train made by Tyco back in the 80s. And they're just vacuum formed casts of them. And they're just glued in place, actually. Now we come to the arm assembly, which is a Seymour Buns shoulder, this viciously creepy doll for the hands, and then the shoulder is actually from a flashlight, and I'll tell you more about that right now. And it's all bolted to the side. So one of the parts that was used to make Tom is actually this ever-ready floating flashlight, I believe is what it's called. This part on the front here, this bezel, is actually what's used to make his shoulders. So they just took these, and I don't know if they cast them for the original or they just had two of these lights laying around, I'm not sure. But the rest of this light was also put to use. And you may recognize it if you're a fan of MST3K. That is the eye on top of Gypsy's head. And that's what that came from. It's this very same flashlight used to make Tom's shoulders, used also to make Gypsy, along with an infant car seat. There it is. That's how that was done. And this is just, I'm going to use this one for Gypsy if I can ever get my hands on one of those car seats, but they're viciously rare. Now, the engine on the front is just from an old dune buggy toy, and he's completely painted, or just the red parts of him are completely painted in Tester's ruby red metal flake. Now that's Tom done. Let's move on to Crow. Crow is a lot more complex and ultimately a lot more fragile and weedy than Tom here. So now this version of him that I've built here, he's actually painted the wrong color. Crow is actually painted Tester's Lime Gold 1242. I couldn't find any before I made this video. I have found some now, and there is some on the way. But this is actually the wrong color gold. The color gold that he is actually a lot darker. It's a bit greener, a bit more coppery. So I'll repaint him here in a couple of days. But in the meantime, that's the only real major mistake with him at the moment. But I'm gonna walk you through now what this guy is made from, and it's an even bigger pile of random flotsam. Now let's move in here and have a look at Mr. Crow T Robot, more specifically his crown or his feathers or whatever that is on top of his head. Now the crown on top of Crow's head is actually one of these hockey masks. Well, the hockey mask that this grill came from, this face grate came from. And it's a Cooper XL7FGM. I believe it's a Z262.2-M78, made in Canada. This one I will eventually put on Crow, because this is an original. The one that's on there right now is a resin casting. But I wanted to keep it off to show you, give you an idea of what they look like, and here's a still of one of them. But that's the crown, his head feathers. I don't know what you would call them, but that's what that's made from. Now the rest of his head is actually made up of a Schwartz Brothers soap dish. That's actually a soap dish. His eyes are just regular old ping pong balls painted yellow. And then his mouth face thing is an Empire bowling pin from a toy bowling set. And it's actually got parts of it cut out to just bolt the crown on. His neck is just regular PVC pipe. And his body is actually a mix of two Tuppercraft flower vases, part of one and then a complete other one just turned upside down and painted gold. His arms are Wallace desk lamps, the Genesis model, and they've got some foam tubing on the outside of them, just some pipelining. His hands come from the rather problematically named fanny pinchers, which are just little grabby toys, and they're quite hard to find themselves. And that's pretty much what makes up Crow. He has a pretty complex puppetry system in him that allows the mouth and the eyes to move individually. So there you go. That is how Tom Servo and Crow T Robot from Mystery Science Theater 3000 were built and what they were built from. If you have any interest in building kits like these, there are complete kits available on eBay through the eBay store of Dr. Forrester, and that's actually Bob Bukowski, the guy that made them for Netflix. The link for that is actually below in the description. So go ahead and check him out and order some of his kits and buy them from him. He's actually working on trying to get some castings made of the infant car seat used to make Gypsy, which no one has successfully done so far that I can find. And the infant car seat used is actually a thing called a Century Infant Love Seat. And these are from the 80s, and they were bundled with cars from GM. So there's actually two versions. There's the Century and the GM Infant Love Seat. And they're exceedingly hard to find because, as I understand it, they were recalled. And most people, when they're done with the baby seat, chuck them. So they're very, very rare. As far as Crow and Tom go, the rarest parts on these two guys that I can find so far is with Crow, it's the lamp used to make his arms. And with Tom, it's the money lover barrel, which are apparently non-existent because I imagine that's not a thing that stayed on shelves for very long. But if you like this video, please leave a comment below, hit the like and subscribe, and consider Patreon so that I can keep making stuff like this and to help support the channel. You can check out my social media links below and look at the other work that I'm doing and get a heads up on maybe some of the videos that I'll be doing in the future. But if you have an interest in Mystery Science Theater 3000, you can watch it on Orbitz TV. It's on there pretty regularly, and I think you can actually binge the entire thing. It is leaving Netflix at the end of this month, so if you have a chance to watch it before it goes, do that. And the folks from Mystery Science Theater 3000 actually do a live tour, which they just finished up a couple of days ago, but I'm assuming they'll do it again next year, and it is worth going to. It is fantastic, and that's Joel. I believe Joel Hodgson is still running that. And if you've never heard of it, check out Rifftrax, Rifftrax.com. It's the folks from Mystery Science Theater 3000 riffing on modern film. And it's the only way I've ever seen Twilight, and it made Twilight watchable. Because it's terrible. Anyway, thank you again for watching. Cheers.